Have you ever wondered where God is when your heart feels empty? When you lie awake at 3 a.m., asking questions that echo into the darkness. Who am I, really? Why do I feel so disconnected? Is God even listening? Most people don't say these questions out loud. They hide them under work, relationships, endless noise. But the ache never leaves. Carl Jung saw this ache everywhere. In the eyes of patients who sat across from him, holding secrets too heavy for words. He believed the greatest crisis of modern life is not the lack of information, but the lack of meaning. And when meaning collapses, so does our connection to the divine. Why we feel so far from God? Think about it. We live in an age where we worship certainty, but God lives in the mystery. We crave control, but the soul thrives in surrender. We spend our days glued to screens, scrolling through other people's lives, yet we forget how to listen to our own. And then we wonder, why don't I feel God? Why do I feel like a stranger in my own skin? Maybe it's not that God is absent. Maybe it's that we've become strangers to ourselves. The ancient truth, Jung knew that the search for God is not just a question of belief, it's a question of identity. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And what is the unconscious, if not the temple where the divine whispers live? You won't find God by climbing a ladder to heaven, the places you'd rather avoid, the shadows you deny, the fears you bury, because deep down, under all the layers, is where your soul remembers. I am part of something greater. When you're disconnected, you forget who you are. When you don't know yourself, you can't know what you believe in. When you're cut off from your true self, God feels like an idea, not a presence. So you grasp for meaning outside. Religion becomes ritual without heart. Belief becomes fear of punishment instead of a bridge to freedom. Faith becomes guilt, shame, judgment. But Jung saw another way. He believed the greatest act of faith is not just believing in God, but daring to believe that God lives in you. Call to action. A quiet whisper if you feel this ache. This sense that you've lost touch with something sacred. Take a breath, close your eyes, and ask, who am I, really? What am I avoiding inside me that keeps me from feeling God? If this is waking something up in you, stay with me. In part 2, we'll look at how Jung saw the self, not just as your ego, but as the spark of the divine living at your center. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. What if everything you're looking for out there, the answers, the love, the certainty, even God, is waiting for you inside? Carl Jung spent his whole life trying to help people see this simple but terrifying truth. The more you search for God outside of you, in other people, in rigid dogmas, in the approval of a preacher or a guru, the more you risk losing the living God within. He called this the archetype of God. To Jung, God was not just a figure on a stained glass window. God was a symbol of the self, the totality of who you are when your conscious mind and unconscious depths come together in wholeness. The self, your inner sanctuary. What does this mean? Most of us live trapped in our ego. That tiny voice that says, I am my job, my body, my money, my mistakes, my past. But the self is different. It is the hidden core of you that is timeless, unbroken, infinite. When Jung wrote the self is the totality of the psyche, he meant that inside you there is a center that holds everything you've ever been. Light and shadow, pain and joy, fear and courage, and it holds it in love. This is where God lives, not in the perfection you chase, not in the persona you wear like a mask to be accepted. God lives in the wholeness of yourself. Why we project God outside. But here's the problem. Facing the self is the hardest thing you'll ever do. It means admitting you're not just your best traits. It means looking at the parts you hate, the envy, the fear, the rage, the shame, and realizing they're part of you too. So instead of facing that, we project our deepest fears and deepest hopes outward. We split God into good and bad, heaven and hell, reward and punishment. We create dogmas and rules and rituals, hoping they'll protect us from our own depths. But Jung said, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. When you only look outside for God, you keep dreaming. When you dare to look inside, you awaken. The shadow, the door to the divine. Here's the paradox. To find God, you have to walk through your own darkness. The shadow is every part of you you've disowned. The parts you were told were bad. The desires you buried. The pain you pretend doesn't exist. Most people spend their whole lives running from the shadow. They blame others for what they deny in themselves. They judge, they gossip, they hide behind moral superiority. But the shadow never goes away. It waits. It waits for you to have the courage to sit in silence and say, "Show me what I've been afraid to see." God lives in the wholeness. Jung saw this. When you face your shadow, you don't lose your light. You reclaim it. Your compassion grows. Your empathy deepens. Your love stops being conditional. You realize that God is not the voice that condemns you, but the voice that loves you enough to hold all your contradictions. This is the essence of the self. It is not good or bad. It is whole. You are the temple in ancient traditions. The temple was not just a building. It was a symbol for the soul. When Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is within you," he was pointing to this truth that Jung spent his life uncovering. Your mind is the gate. Your heart is the altar. Your soul is the sanctuary. You don't need permission to enter. You don't need someone else to open the door. The door has always been there. Inside you, call to action. A step closer. If you've spent your life searching for God in all the places outside, take a moment now. Place your hand on your heart. Feel it beat. That is your temple. That is where the divine waits for you. Comment below, "I'm ready to look inside," not because you'll find easy answers, but because you're ready for the truth. So many people spend their whole lives trying to be good enough for God. They follow rules they don't even understand. They punish themselves for every doubt, every mistake, every human crack in their perfection. But Carl Jung believed, the real question is not, "Am I good enough for God?" It's, "Am I brave enough to see myself as I really am?" Because every time you look honestly at yourself, the beautiful and the ugly, you walk a step closer to the divine within. Why? Knowing yourself changes everything. Autoconocimiento is not about becoming flawless. When you start to see your patterns, your wounds, your defenses, you stop living on autopilot. You stop projecting your fears onto everyone else. You stop blaming the world for what lives inside you. This is where the spiritual and the psychological meet. The more conscious you are, the less you live in reaction, and the more you live in creation. How your shadow shapes your faith. Think about it. How many people cling to a punishing image of God because they secretly punish themselves? How many imagine a God who rejects them? Because deep down, they reject themselves. This is projection. If you carry shame, you project shame. If you carry unforgiveness, you see an unforgiving God. Jung said that when you integrate your shadow, you stop splitting your soul in two. You see that the divine can hold every contradiction. Love and anger, joy and grief, faith and doubt. You realize, if God lives in me, then I don't need to be perfect to be worthy of love. The power of sacred honesty. Knowing yourself means asking the questions that scare you. Why do I pretend to be someone I'm not? Who am I trying to impress? What would I do if I stopped fearing what they think? This is not easy. It's raw. It's uncomfortable. But each truth you face is a prayer more powerful than any ritual. Each mask you drop is a step closer to God. Because the real you is the only version of you that can stand in the light. Your relationships become a mirror when you commit to knowing yourself. Every relationship becomes a teacher. You see which connections drain you and which ones light you up. You stop choosing people who echo your wounds. You start choosing people who reflect your wholeness. You become less afraid of losing others because you've finally stopped abandoning yourself. This is spiritual maturity. You don't need everyone to love you when you've learned to love the parts you once rejected. Your prayers change. The more you know yourself, the more your conversations with the divine change. Instead of begging for things to go your way, you begin to ask for courage to face what is. Instead of demanding certainty, you find peace in mystery. Instead of fearing your mistakes, you trust that even your failures are part of your soul's unfolding. Jung said, "Bidden or unbidden, God is present." You stop searching and start seeing. You live differently when you walk this path. The little things become sacred. A quiet cup of tea becomes communion. A deep breath becomes a reminder. I am here, and so is the divine. You stop needing to prove your worth. You stop performing holiness. You stop carrying guilt that was never yours to hold. Instead, you stand in the truth. You are human, and that is holy enough. Call to action. A simple prayer. If you've ever been afraid to know yourself because you thought you find something unworthy, take this moment to remember. Nothing real can be rejected by the divine. Comment below, "I choose to know myself." Not for perfection, but for freedom. Because every step closer to who you really are is a step closer to the God who never left you. In part 4, We'll close with this. How to live every day as someone who remembers that finding God is not about distance, but about depth. And a question for you to carry into your own silence. So, now you know, your soul's deepest longing is not just to believe in God. It's to remember that you are not separate from the divine. You don't need to chase a distant heaven. You don't need to earn a place at the table. You are already sitting in the temple. It's just that you forgot. Carl Jung spent his whole life reminding us. The kingdom of God is not a place on a map. It's the deepest room inside your own heart. Why we forget, the world pulls you outward every day. It sells you 1,000 versions of who you should be. It's easier to perform worthiness than to stand naked in the truth of who you really are. It's easier to recite prayers than to sit in silence and listen for the quiet voice that says, you are already enough. You always were. That's why so many people worship fear and call it faith. The true work is daily coming home to God, is not a one-time revelation. It's a practice. Like breathing. Every morning you remember, I am not just my thoughts. I am not just my mistakes. I am not just what they say about me. You look at your shadow and say, you're a part of me too. And you belong. You forgive what you once thought was unforgivable. Not because it didn't hurt, but because your soul knows freedom is holier than revenge. Your life becomes the prayer when you see the divine within. Every small moment becomes sacred. The way you pour your coffee, the way you listen to someone you love, the way you stand up for your truth when it would be easier to hide. God is not waiting for you in the perfect moment, but in the mess you keep trying to fix before you feel worthy. The mess is the altar. Your shadow becomes your teacher. Jung taught that the parts of you fear the most are often the parts that hold the key to your liberation. When you face your jealousy, your rage, your despair, you don't lose your holiness. You expand it. You become someone who can hold contradictions without breaking. You become someone who can love without pretending. You become someone who trusts. Nothing in me is too much for God to hold. This is the awakening when you know yourself. You stop searching for the divine like it's lost. You begin to live like you've come home. And that changes everything. You stop waiting for signs to tell you you're worthy. You stop trying to earn love through suffering. You stop apologizing for the depth of what you feel. And you realize you are not just a seeker. You are a sacred place where God lives. A whisper for your soul if this truth stirred something in you. If it cracked open a door you've been afraid to walk through. Remember, God is not hidden from you. God is hidden inside you. Call to action. Speak it aloud. If you're ready to remember that knowing yourself is meeting God, comment below. I come home to myself. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from? Because this is how we remind each other. We're not alone on this path. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Share this with someone who's ready to stop searching outside and start listening within. The final question before you close your eyes tonight, ask yourself, where in me have I been afraid to look? And what sacred truth is waiting there for me? May you find the courage to open that door.